And with us now is Kristen Waggoner. She is the president of Alliance Defending Freedom, which filed an amicus brief in support of Tennessee's law. Thank you for coming in to talk with us about it. You were in court during these arguments. And I should also note that in the issue of the Bostock case, ADF represented the party in that case. That case did not prevail. And I'm wondering how you felt walking out of court today from what you heard compared to how that day felt.
I would say we felt good about it. We also have the privilege of representing 2 other states. Actually over half of all states have passed laws similar to Tennessee's. We represent a couple of states alongside their attorneys general as well. And the principle or the question before the court is whether the Constitution permits states to keep kids safe from dangerous and experimental drugs and surgeries.
Did you have a sense today that this was going one way or the other? What did you think leaving?
Well, we've had a number of constitutional cases before the court, and you never want to speculate about what it will do. But in listening to the questions, I think what was very clear was that the U.S., the Department of Justice, was quickly walking back any allegation or suggestion that there's overwhelming scientific support for this, because there's not. And in the course of that, the justices were hearing again and again about the studies and how Europe let out on this issue in pushing this gender ideology, and now they're in quick retreat because they're seeing the tangible physical harms to kids.
It's not completely settled, right? I mean, that is the truth, though. And one person's needed medical care is another person's child abuse. This is an issue that a lot of Americans look at, and they're divided on this, right? So statistics are clear, though, what it can mean for trans youths who don't receive the treatment when they're seeking it, that there can be an increase in suicide, even an increase in suicide among some of these laws being emphasized in states. How do you balance that?
Well, I'd respond in 2 ways. First of all, that's the role of the legislature to balance benefits and risks. But I would disagree with most of what was even in the question, and that what we heard before the court today is that the overwhelming science is saying again and again that the benefits of these drugs, there's little or no evidence to support them, and the risks are off the charts. And in terms of those risks, they're very tangible, where a woman like Prisha Mosley, who at 14 was sexually assaulted, 15, 16, diagnosed with serious mental illness. By 18, she has testosterone in her breasts removed, and her shoulders are too wide to support her hips. She didn't lose her fertility, but many do in this process. No child is equipped to make those decisions when they're a child as to whether they want sexual dysfunction that comes, whether they want to lose the chance to have a baby, to feel their baby on their chest. And so ultimately today, in terms of this suicide and suicidality, it came up in court as well. And the evidence suggests that also, if you have these puberty blockers or cross-sex hormones, your chances of suicide actually increase rather than decrease. So even if this is unsettled, we shouldn't constitutionalize a right.
Folks on the other side, as you'll know, and you've heard them, they'll disagree with you on that. And some of them will say these are the kinds of treatments that have saved their lives and that can save lives. So this argument, you hear this on the other side. I wonder, you tweeted, it's insidious to tell vulnerable kids they are born in the wrong body and lead them down a path full of irreversible consequences. But what do you do about this when a lot of times we do hear stories, it's not the adults telling the kids, it's actually many times the kids telling the adults, some of whom are reticent to fully embrace what that may mean. Parents talk about this. They're not the ones putting this in their child's head. So what do you say to those parents?
It's heartbreaking to see a child that is in need and is expressing confusion. And it's interesting that this explosion of children who are experiencing this aligns with what they're seeing on social media and an explosion in social media. This is not typical for this to happen. While the number of adults who want to identify as the opposite sex has remained constant, our kids are experiencing all kinds of crisis, and it's not just in this issue. So I think it suggests there's a deeper need and a deeper approach that we need to take. But I want to take it back to what was before the court today, which is that the evidence-based medicine would suggest we shouldn't constitutionalize a right to experiment on our kids. And this right now is an experiment. And so far what we see is far more evidence suggesting it brings real, tangible, long-term, and irreversible harm to them.
I want to ask you, because ADF, you're talking about, of course, what is before the court today. The ADF has been involved in so many different cases. This one, yes, but also when it comes to workplace discrimination, the Bostock case I mentioned, trans athletes in sports, parental consent for lessons about gender identity, treatment restriction for trans minors. That's some of the kids stuff. And some of the adult stuff with the sports, but there's also stuff having to do with adults, having to do with trans adults. It's not just the kids that ADF is focused on. I wonder, as you know, and there are people who agree with you, but do you ever consider that these anti-trans laws and stances may not age well?
I don't consider the fact that not standing up in this moment and not standing for children and for biological reality, that is so critical in this moment. We're seeing this ideology that's being used to disempower parents. As you say, it causes such concern with a parent when a medical professional that's misguided is saying your child needs to choose between suicide or you pump their body with drugs that is not going to allow them to naturally develop. What kind of choice is that for a parent when the science actually says it will bring harm to the child? So I know we're on the right side of this, but all children deserve compassion, and this isn't it. It might look like it, but it's deeply misguided.
Not just kids. That was the point I wanted to get at with you. You're talking about kids, and this case is about kids, but ADF is involved in a number of cases, aside from this one, in efforts that have to do as well with adults, with trans adults.
No, that's not true.
Bostock.
You just said a number of cases, and that's not true, that we're involved in a number of cases. What we are involved in is ensuring that when the law is interpreted...
ADF represented a party in the Bostock case.
We represented a party in the Bostock case involving whether Title VII in employment law discriminates on the basis of sex.
Not children being discriminated in employment, just to be clear.
It's apples and oranges what you're comparing, and you're only mentioning one case. What we are about is ensuring
trans athletes in sports.
First of all, you just said trans adults, and that's just not true. We're not involved in a lot of those cases, but I'm glad that you brought up the sports cases because they were brought up today too. When there are biological differences and the law doesn't recognize relevant biological differences, it's largely women and girls like us who are going to face harm. And the women's sports issue, Americans are waking up to see this extreme danger, the loss of women's rights and equal opportunities, the loss of their privacy in dorm rooms and locker rooms, as well as their safety. Girls are being harmed from having to compete against men who have a 10 to 50% physical advantage over them that no amount of puberty blockers or cross-sex hormones stop.
Yeah, and the point being, it's not just about kids. ADF's interests are not only about children in this realm.
I think that you're creating this box to try to put everything in it and to suggest that we aren't about all people.
I'm just talking about the body of work of your organization.
I think that the gender ideology movement and the transgender ideology that's being pushed on Americans right now has gone so far that it's threatening to silence people, it's bullying them, and it's telling them that they should ignore reality.
I think a lot of people are confused about this issue. They don't know where they stand on it. But where is the room for a conversation about this?
I love that we're having one right now in terms of a conversation, and that's what was at issue today, because the ACLU and the Biden administration has taken this issue to the U.S. Supreme Court and said there is no room for this debate. It is a matter of constitutional right, and the left consistently tries to constitutionalize all of American life. It is not a constitutional right to engage in experimental surgeries that cause a child to lose their fertility. What kid, what girl knows whether she's going to want to have a baby long term, or what testosterone will do to her uterus, or that she will increase her risk of heart attack by taking these drugs?
Some of them do.
No.
None of them.
No, I don't think
None of them do.
85%, what we know from the science, and again, it's about not putting ideology over evidence. And that's what's happening here. 85% of all kids that are able to grow through puberty, who say they're gender confused, over 85% of those kids live at peace with their bodies and consistent with their sex. In those children that are put on puberty blockers, the science tells us that you're putting them on a one-way treadmill to live as the opposite sex for the rest of their life, and they will still experience being a lifelong patient.
And I think that is a great question, certainly, to be discussed. And for someone on the other side of this equation to answer for, there's also people who do not do that. And so that's something that I wanted to discuss with you, and I appreciate you being on today, Kristen.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much. Kristen Waggoner. We'll have more news when we come back.